Hi everyone, Andrea here with Crafts on the Move in the studio, and today I'm going to share a fun technique that I have been using for a few months now, and that is embossing with cardstock and foil sheets. These are some of the samples I have. This is white cardstock inked with distress ink and then covered in the glimmer opal foil. This is Spellbinder's Rainforest cardstock covered in the glimmer opal. This is white cardstock foiled with the glimmer moondust foil. And then lastly, this is white cardstock foiled with opal foil as well. So this has a really nice shimmer, like iridescent sheen to it. It's so much fun. What you're going to want for this technique is sheets of double-sided tape, tissue tape, paper tape, tear tape, whichever you use. You want it large enough to cover whatever panel you're going to emboss and foil. And then I do recommend some type of a powder tool every once in a while. The adhesive is a little tacky on your panels, and if you just rub some of the powder to neutralize the sticky, you'll have a nice smooth surface. And then you will need foil sheets. And you can use foil that you use in a laminator or foil that you use for the hot plate like the Glimmer, and I believe Gemini also has one. It doesn't matter, it works just as well. I will say, depending on the color and the brand, will also vary on how well the foil is applied. Sometimes, depending on how thin that foil is, it will alter the finished look. And then lastly, or not second to last, you're going to want an embossing folder. I will be using 3D embossing folders. This folder is from The Weekender, and it is the one that made this one. So I'm going to make this one, again, the green cardstock with this embossing folder. And then you're going to want your machine, and you will need your plates. You're going to need D if you are using a Spellbinder Platinum and their 3D embossing folders. So you're going to follow your manufacturer's sandwich for your embossing folder, whichever you are using. Some people might be using just a regular embossing, 2D embossing folder if you're using a 3D. So just check with your manufacturer's sandwich system. And I'm gonna pull out my machine and get set up, and then we're gonna come back. So I have a couple sheets of A2 panel cardstock. The other thing I didn't mention is you're going to want a pair of scissors. I will be using the Tim Holtz, I think these are the tonic non-stick shears. These are great for cutting larger pieces of foil, and they don't stick as much as some of the others. Plus, I'm going to be cutting my tape, so I definitely want a non-stick for cutting my tape. The first thing you're going to do is pick your embossing folder. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with this one from The Weekender, and I'm going to grab my A2 panel of Rainforest and my roll of tape, and I'm going to add the tape to one side of the panel of the cardstock. And if you are using inked paper, you want to make sure your ink is completely dry, otherwise the tape may not stick well when the ink is wet. And you want to apply the inked side down, because this is the side here that we're actually going to see. Then just cut your tape to size, and then I recommend removing any of this excess tape, and the reason being is because it can stick to your platform and tear your paper, tear your finished project. So I'm remove most of it. And if you are cutting down, if you are using a full panel for your background, I do recommend starting with a slightly oversized panel of cardstock and tape. That way you can trim it down. Once you have your double-sided adhesive on your cardstock, you're going to carefully remove the backing of the double-sided cardstock, excuse me, the double-sided paper tape, and this is I'm not gonna lie, this is very challenging. Sometimes it's hard to separate the backing from the tape. It wants to tear the cardstock. And there is my cardstock covered with my double-sided paper tape. Now I'm going to cover this front. I'm going to add the foil to this panel. This is the second hardest part, is getting that foil as smooth as possible. And I'm going to be using the opal. I'm using the opal for this. And on this one, the opal foil is face up, just like all the other glimmer foils. And then you're just gonna lay this down as smooth as you can. I have found just laying it down like that is the easiest. And you can see here, I have a piece that didn't get covered. You can cover that with some of the excess. Just cut this off. So I'm just going to take a little bit of this excess. Make sure on this opal foil you know which side is the foil side. And I'm going to just cover this up right here. Perfect. And then you can trim your foil if you want. It depends on your embossing folder and how close you need to get to the edges. Some of the embossing folders that are full 8.5 by 8 by 5.5, you can just set it in the center, but this one, it's 2 panels, so I actually need to make the foil as flush on one side as possible. Okay, now I'm gonna go ahead and stick my prepared panel face up in my embossing folder, and I just going to play with this so it's centered on the embossing. That looks good. And for a Spellbinder Platinum, for this embossing folder, you're going to want your A platform, your embossing folder, and the paper that's in here, and your D plate. Okay, you're going to go ahead and insert your embossing folder into your machine and roll it. I don't recommend going back and forth. That breaks down the plastic, and I noticed that the adhesive will pop through a little bit, it's making the front sticky. Now carefully remove your paper, and then carefully remove the plastic. And you want to be careful that you don't tear that tissue tape off. And then just carefully remove the plastic. Now, I typically just trim around the edges so that way I don't have any tackiness. Right now there's a little bit of tacky because there was some overhang from the tissue tape, but look at how pretty that opalescent is on that cardstock. So much fun. Now we're going to apply colored foil to a white cardstock. So I'm going to take, I think this is Aura, and I am going to show you one other trick. So what I'm going to do, I wanted to make a diamond shaped emboss panel, and so the best way to do this is to go ahead and get your panel and grab your paper tape and cover your panel whatever size you need for your die. I'm just going to do the whole thing. There's going to be a little bit of waste on this, but that's okay. And then I'm going to cut. I'm going to cut this out with the backing of the tissue tape still on. So run this through, and I'm just going to die cut this like I would any other die cut. Now the reason I'm doing it this way is because if I die cut after I emboss it, it might flatten the texture from the embossing plate, and I don't want that. But I definitely want the diamond shape. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cover this diamond with some of that Aura foil. So I'm just going to open this up. I'm going to expose the adhesive by removing this protective sheet, and then I'm just going to put this down on my foil. I'm going to cut this up. So I'm going to remove the excess of the foil. Now I'm going to pick an embossing folder, and I'm going to do the crackle. No, you know what? I'm just going to do these leaves. I'm going to do these leaves. These are a fun set of leaves. And this is one of the panels that is a full embossing panel, so I don't need to worry about the direction. I grab my D plate. And again, just go through once. Once should be plenty. Sometimes the foil doesn't stick the way it should. Let's go ahead and carefully remove the foil. And look at that. You have this beautiful, beautiful result. Now there's a little bit of white exposed here. So what I typically do is I just take a clean piece of the foil and I just rub it in, and the exposed adhesive will, the foil will stick to that exposed adhesive. And look at that. So cool. And then you can mat it just like that. Isn't that awesome? So that's another way to make the emboss with the foil and die cut it. So, so cool. So that is how you transfer the foil to your cardstock using embossing folders. And now you have some gorgeous foil pieces that you made with your embossing folders. And I know these rolls have tons of foil, and it's just another way to use these foils. I hope you loved it, and thanks for watching. Bye.